Thanks for that, Katie. Changing the economics, that's at the root of crime in Jacksonville. It's what advocates against violence are calling for as families across the First Coast wake up this morning.
So far, just this year, there have now been more than 25 shootings across Jacksonville. 8 of them have turned out to be deadly. On your side's Renata DiGregorio joining us now live with what these advocates want and some clarification on this whole issue revolving around poverty. Hello, Renata.
Hello, good morning. More and more names are being added to a memorial outside families of slain children over in Moncrief. But those who are standing up against gun violence in the city say that the city needs to do more to get people out of poverty. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. Census Bureau data shows that is 1 in every 6 people.
Until we begin to address the economic issue, everything else we do is like applying a Band-Aid to an open wound.
That open wound, Jacksonville's gun violence that this year left 8 people dead in 17 days. Northside Coalition of Jacksonville founder Ben Frazier says crime, poverty, and economics go hand in hand, and the city must do more to address it.
These people need jobs. The city cannot ignore the economic part of this equation.
Beverly McLean, founder of the nonprofit Families of Slain Children, echoes this. Her son was murdered 14 years ago when he couldn't get a job and went back to crime.
I took him everywhere trying to find a job because he had a felony record. He couldn't work. So he got back with his friends and was doing whatever he was doing out there.
2 of the goals of Jacksonville's Task Force on Safety and Crime Reduction are workforce training and business partnerships. Aaron Bowman, the city council member who established it, says the workforce training program started at the end of last year, and he wants to kick off a mentorship program with businesses.
We're calling for a Marshall Plan of economic redevelopment and revitalization in certain neighborhoods in particular.
City leaders estimate almost 40 shootings were prevented in the first 6 months of a new crime prevention program called Cure Violence. Councilman Bowman tells me that tomorrow they plan to have a finance meeting to decide how much money to give the task force. Live outside City Hall, Renata DiGregorio, First Coast News on your side.